Welcome, Mr. Mayor, and everybody here and online. My name is David Hall, and I'm on the trustee board here at the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution, which I'm spelling out for the people who are online. Anyway, we have a fascinating evening ahead of us, looking at the beginnings of the close relationship between Bath and Alkmaar in the Netherlands. It's going to be given by the chair of the Bath-Alkmaar Twinning Association, Chris Davies. But before Chris comes to the rostrum, I'm honoured to introduce the Right Worshipful, the Mayor of Bath, Councillor Professor Bharat Pankhania, who is not only President of the Twinning Association, but also a good friend of this charity as a fellow member of the trustee board here. Of course, he needs no further introduction, so welcome, Mr. Mayor. The podium is yours.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. I remember being here as a young consultant in communicable disease control 25 years ago, talking about the earthquake in India, where I had gone to help in Bhuj in Gujarat state. And to full circle, I then become director of the trustees at Brisley. It's amazing. And I'm here in my new capacity as Mayor for Bath. It is my honor to be here with you. This is a lovely story. This is Alkmaar Week here in Bath, and we must share it, and we must do more of it. This is truly a story of tragedy, defiance, compassion, and we will hear more about it. So we all met with the Mayor of Alkmaar this week. I was with her yesterday, and we showed her our beautiful city. And Chris was telling me just now that he spent another day showing them our beautiful city and regions. And what I want to share with all of you is this. The Mayor of Alkmaar said, despite Brexit, we will find a way around increasing our friendship, our cultural ties, our exchanges, and our cooperation on all matters, arts, crafts, political, commercial. And I feel, yes, that's the way forward. No matter what adversity that we have, we will find a way together, and we will find a way together to do good for all people. So over to you, Chris. Thank you.
So here we have Chris Davies, and he has the rostrum.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here to share this story with you. It's a story which I know some of you have heard, some of you have not, but it's a story I love to tell. I've been saying a few times this week, it's Alkmaar Week, that our link with Alkmaar continues after 8 decades. And two reasons, perhaps. One is because actually it brings a lot of joy to the people who are involved. I used to say fun, but the vicar today said the word joy, and I think she's right. It actually brings a lot of joy. We enjoy ourselves, nothing wrong with that. We have fun. We'll come on to that later. But also because at the heart of it is a... Oh, I'm sorry, right, okay, well, there we go. Yeah, is that better? Yes. Great, okay. I'm very, as I was saying, we have a lot of fun through our twinning link, and you'll see at the end how that is produced. But also at the heart of this link is a story. To be human is to tell stories. We tell stories to each other. We've been telling stories to each other for millennia, because it's through stories we pass on knowledge and advice and give future generations, hopefully, advice that they can put into use. So that's why it was this story which first got me involved with the Bath-Alkmaar Twinning Association. So it is a story, as we said, of tragedy, defiance, and compassion. Like all stories, it has some very sad parts, and also has some very joyful parts. And I was asked, I was looking at the brief that I was asked to speak to, where are we, that I should be promising, oh yes, a story that involves defiance of red tape, fundraising grit, a Dutch queen, a warm-hearted general, and last but not least, a rather crunky old barrel organ, all of which will appear in this story. So welcome everybody online. We're being joined from a number of people joining us from the Netherlands as well. So goedenavond. That's the extent of my Dutch, everybody. So let me take you to Bath, 1940. In fact, precisely, to be more precise, the 12th of August, 1940. In fact, it's lunchtime on the 12th of August, 1940. And members of the Rotary Club of Bath, that august body, are meeting for lunch, as they still do on a Tuesday lunchtime, and have a speaker. Some of us were there this week. And speakers tend to be local historians or members of the club who come and talk about their hobby or their latest holiday or how to solve the terrible problem of traffic in Bath. That's one of the subjects that used to be discussed. But on this particular day, the outside speaker is slightly different. A short young man in his mid-30s, wearing dark-rimmed glasses. He's only been in Bath 3 weeks. In fact, he's only been in England 3 weeks. Because this is Mr. Elias Ailey Prins, who was living in Alkmaar and escaped to Bath. We'll say a bit more about how that came about. And he made an address, and I think you could argue that this perhaps is the most influential speech that anybody has made in Bath for 80 years, in terms of the impact that he has had and continues to have 80 years on. Of course, Ailey didn't know that, neither did the august members of the Rotary Club. But let us just leave him there about to be introduced. Let's just set the scene here, because, of course, we all know what happened in the Second World War. We all know that we won and that good prevailed. But Ailey didn't know this. Ailey didn't know this. The Rotarians didn't know this. Where were we? Well, in May, just a few weeks earlier, which is why Ailey had to leave, the German army had swept into Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands. In late May, remember we're in August, in late May and June, 340,000 troops had been evacuated from Dunkirk. On the 4th of June, the new Prime Minister, Mr. Churchill, made his now famous speech. We shall defend our island. We will fight on the beaches, on the landing grounds, in the fields, on the streets, in the hills. We will never surrender. The message was pretty clear what to expect next. The expected invasion of the south of Britain. And it was expected. All the evidence suggested that the German army would be arriving. On the 10th of July, what we now call the Battle of Britain began. This was the German Luftwaffe's attempt to gain air superiority over southern Britain in preparation for what was called Operation Sea Lion. So an address from someone who had literally escaped as parachutists were landing, had to jump on a boat, sail across the North Sea, dodging mines, bombs. An address from someone at this point was quite a compelling speech, whatever he had said. In fact, we know what his opening statement was. He said this: Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, and he quoted from the Old Testament, from the book of Jeremiah. A people cometh from the north, a great nation will be raised against you. They shall lay hold of bow and spear. They are cruel and have no mercy. Their voices roareth like the sea, and they ride upon horses set in array as men for war. And Daly pointed out, it doesn't take much imagination to change north to east, to change bow and spear to gun and cannon, and to change horses to tanks and planes. So in those circumstances, it's not surprising that this young man, when he stood up, and there he is, Mr. Elias Prins, when he gave this speech to the Rotary Club, and he was a very fine orator, had quite an impact, to say the least. In fact, he made the papers. It was reported in the Bath Chronicle, poignant talk to Bath Rotarians. I'm not going to read all of that, but I'll read one section, which is a touching moment. Mr. Prins continued, I saw the Dutch coast fade in the distance, the most touching moment of my life. It was nearly morning, 5 o'clock, and the sun was rising in a beauty behind the sand dunes. I took a long, last and sad look at my country, the country where I'd been born and lived all my life happily, now, please God, but temporarily, under the tyranny of brutal oppressors. And he tells the story of the boat that he escaped on. It took them 24 hours. They went through a storm. They approached the English coast near Lowestoft. And of course, they immediately then had to start worrying about British mines. So what did they do? By this time, they'd been picking people up from little rowing boats, desperately trying to escape. A boat that was meant to hold 7 had almost 60 people on it, including a young 10-year-old who they put at the front of the boat and said, look out for any mines, and if you see any, tell us which way to steer. They arrived in Lowestoft, where Ellie says they were met by the Salvation Army, were given some cigarettes, those are the days, and a cup of tea, which I think he says was the best cup of tea he'd ever tasted. And he then came to Bath. Now, why was he in Bath? The reason is his sister, Rose Prins, had a few years earlier married an Englishman, and she was living in Bath. So the obvious place for Ailey to come was Bath. And he went and lived with his sister at 65 Great Pulteney Street. You can go and see it. It's there. And he quickly got involved with the air raid wardens. He volunteered immediately to be an air raid warden. And he met someone who had heard his talk. And that was this gentleman, Jimmy Wills. Frederick Wills, as called him officially, but he was known as Jimmy Wills. Jimmy was one of those people who was involved in all sorts of things. He was the secretary to the Rotary Club. He was the secretary to the Rugby Club. He had his fingers in lots of pies. He was a big local figure, very well known. And he was also the head of the air raid warden unit for Bathwick, where, of course, Ellie was also living. So he joined the ARP and he got to know Jimmy. And Jimmy is the second determined and interested person that comes into our tale. But Ailey also volunteered for the Allied forces that were based here. Several thousand of the Royal Navy had been moved here. And he served as an intelligence officer with those. He was an air raid warden, and he kept on giving talks, including this talk. This is a photo from the Bath Chronicle. I slightly cheated by putting 2 photos together. But this is Ailey addressing children in Bath Library, where he talked to them about what it was like to be a child in the Netherlands, how the Netherlands was different from Bath and how it was the same. And in short, he became quite a well-known figure. He became well-connected. He was always ready to talk to virtually anybody, have a discussion with them, have a debate with them. He became a very well-known person in Bath. And remember, he was in the air raid wardens with Jimmy. Now, almost certainly, Jimmy and Ailey, either they were here that night or that weekend, or they were soon back Because one event which affected everybody in Bath, and that, of course, was the weekend of the April 1942, the Bath Blitz. Bath, for those of you who don't know, Bath wasn't thought to be a target. There was no really major military target here. And as a retaliation for some bombing that the RAF had done, Hitler ordered the Luftwaffe to bomb various tourist locations, York, Exeter, and Bath. And hundreds of German bombers attacked Bath over a weekend, 3 raids, 2 in one evening and 1 the following evening, in April 1942. And the devastation was, as you can imagine, considerable. There's the heading. Heavy death toll in second raid. For the second night in succession, Bath took the brunt of the Nazi vengeance for RAF raids. For 2 hours, bombers rained their loads of destruction on the city and swept the streets with machine guns. More photos, and many people. So, in fact, thousands of houses were damaged. The Assembly Room, of course, burnt down. Bath's Great East Window was blown in. Homes across the city in ruins. Over 400 people killed in a weekend. Thousands injured, and many thousands more made homeless. That photo of people with their cups of tea is from Twerton. That was in Twerton, where a lot of bombs landed. And in fact, just to give an impression, I don't know how well you can see that, the red dots on that picture in the middle, that's where bombs landed. Pretty much everywhere. Now, I highlight this for 2 reasons. First, because this is what Jimmy and Ellie went through, recovering from that, digging people from rubble, sadly digging bodies as well. But it's also the city which later on the Mayor of Alkmaar visits. It's important. So the war drags on. Other ingredients start to come into our story. If you're very clever, you may recognize this. This was a film that came out in 1943. The war is the tide is beginning to turn now. And these are stills from a film, quite a famous film, called One of Our Aircraft is Missing. It tells the story of a British bombing crew that are damaged and on their way back from Germany crash in the Netherlands and are rescued by the resistance and smuggled back out of the country. Now, on the face of it, it's a propaganda film, but it's the first film that people like Peter Ustinov, this was his first film. Googie Withers, those of you who might remember, was one of the heroes. Some very famous people were involved, and in fact, actually, it's a really good film. If you get the chance to see the new print, there's a new print of it. So it looks like it looked in 1943 when it was shown here in Bath. One important thing, there's a bit towards the end where the Googie Withers character is talking to the airman about the Blitz. And the Brits say, well, you know, we have an expression in Britain, we can take it. And she says, yes, we have an expression a bit like that. Nederland zal herrijzen. The Netherlands shall rise again. I make that point, it will come back a bit later. So, the war carries on. It's now turning in Britain's favour. We try and end the war early, before Christmas 1944, with the infamous Arnhem raid, the attempt to capture the bridge at Arnhem, the so-called Bridge Too Far. And in support of that, the Dutch resistance rise up. The train drivers go on strike. They refuse to move. They do everything they can to help the Allies win. Of course, it doesn't succeed. And the Germans decide that it's time to teach these pesky Dutch a lesson. The winter of 1944 is a terribly cold winter. And the Germans decide that they will restrict food and fuel for the Dutch population. The result, of course, not surprisingly, is a famine. The only known famine amongst what one might call a Western First Nation nation. It's known as in Dutch, the hunger winter. People were reduced to eating tulips or making tulip soup. There was no fuel, so they would burn furniture to try and keep warm. The daily ration, the official daily ration per person, was 320 calories, which is about an eighth of what a human person needs. That's the official. Many people got nothing at all. And it's estimated something like 20,000 people died as a result of that famine, including around Alkmaar, around 600 people. So this was a terrible famine. It particularly affected children, as you can imagine. I think that might well be tulip soup, I'm not sure. And so, when it became known that there was this terrible famine, in Britain, a number of high-profile people, politicians, people like musicians, decided to form the Help Holland Council. And here is a letter from a splendid photo of Queen Wilhelmina. Here's the Dutch Queen, who was in exile. She'd managed to escape and come to London. And this is a message from her supporting the Help Holland Council. You'll see February 1945. And it says it, I have to move over here. Yes. It's with deep pleasure and gratitude that I've heard of the efforts of a number of prominent British personalities. And at the end she says, may your appeal meet with widespread response. Thank you. A widespread response. Now, this is significant. Ailey and Jimmy spend long nights watching for the planes. And when around this time, Jimmy suddenly has an idea. He says, you know, why don't we, in Bath, do our bit for the Help Holland Council, but instead, wouldn't it be great if we could just collect for your hometown, Ailey? Because you're well known. People know you're from Alkmaar. You've given your talks. If we collect for Alkmaar, it will be more meaningful for people than if we say, well, let's just collect some stuff. It'll go to Holland, who knows? And Jimmy reports that Ailey was slightly reluctant, wasn't sure it was quite the appropriate thing to do. But he was persuaded to go with Jimmy up to London to see the members of the Help Holland Council, which they did. And they said, well, if it's all right with you, we'd like to make sure that Bath would like to do its bit. We'd like to collect food, clothing, furniture, and send it to Alkmaar. And the Help Holland Council said, well, that's very interesting. No. You collect the stuff, give it to us, we'll decide where it's needed most. Now, Jimmy was also someone who was not used to being told no. So he said, well, now, Ailey, you've got contacts with Queen Wilhelmina. Can't we write to the Queen? Because if the Queen gives us permission, we can do it. So a message reached Queen Wilhelmina. We're not entirely sure how. Maybe there was a letter. Maybe a message was put in. Anyway, the bottom line was the Queen heard of this idea, thought it was a splendid idea, and said, yes, you have my permission. So that was two fingers to the Help Holland Council. And in March, on the 26th of March, a meeting of the Rotary Club was held, a special meeting with lots of other community groups. The mayor chaired it, and it was agreed to set up the Bath-Alkmaar adoption appeal with royal approval. And remember, this is what's interesting about this link. So Bath adopted Alkmaar when it was still occupied by the Germans. The Germans were still there. They didn't leave there until the end of the war. And an appeal then went out, said, right, Bath has adopted a Dutch town. If I've got the right thing here, I'm cutting here. And there was a letter that went in from the chair of the Rotary Club, was chairman of the committee, but a letter went out from the mayor of Bath, Councillor Edgar L. Clements, and he said, to give the people of Alkmaar tangible proof on the day of their liberation, when it comes, that their friends across the sea know that sympathy and good cheer are best expressed by practical gifts of help and service. And the plan was that there would be two arms of the campaign. One would be collecting household necessities, and the other would be to collect money. Money would help refund the English section of Alkmaar Library, which the Germans had destroyed, also to buy kit for sports clubs for children and so on, and provide clothes for children and women. And as a result of the efforts of all those involved, I think it's fair to say it somehow caught the imagination of the whole of Bath. And I want to give a few examples. This is all quoted from the newspaper. St. Luke's Infants and Junior School collected 6 wooden packing cases of clothing, toys, tin food, kitchen utensils, and £8 in cash, which would be about £900. In Widcombe, this is a wonderful story. This is on May the 19th, so just after VE Day. In Widcombe, a Mrs. Tai Lee marched around the streets with accompanying children playing her accordion. She raised £14, 4 shillings and 11 pence. This is where things really took off. Bath City Football Club put on a charity match. And the barrel organ, which we'll come to in a moment, was played. A Dutch airman who was based, one of the bases, Mr. Hoot Cooper, I hope I've pronounced his name properly, he had lived in Alkmaar. He donated 2 weeks' pay, expressing thanks for what the people of Bath were doing. There was a special stamp collection put on at the art gallery. A benefit performance of Noel Coward's Blithe Spirit was put on at the Palace Theatre in Saw Close, raising £62, 17 shillings. This is quite an interesting story. Mr. Chappell, it's reported in the paper, accidentally dropped his wallet with £8 and many personal papers in it. It was found and returned to him. The honest person would accept no reward, so Mr. Chappell donated the whole £8 to the Alkmaar appeal. On Saturday, July the 21st, Stotherton Pitts, of course a huge employer then, put on, and this is quite a picture, they put on a sports and show for the Alkmaar appeal, which consisted of athletic races, cycle races, horticultural shows, a rabbit and caged bird show, a baby show, a politically incorrect now ankle competition, which was won, I can tell you, by Miss Pat Mead, aged 18, a bric-a-brac market, a comic football match, skittles, darts, children's roundabouts, donkey rides and sideshows. And all of the proceeds went to the Alkmaar appeal. And on October the 4th, an auction was held at the old post office, including crockery, jewellery, silverware, china, glass, paintings, which raised a total of £359, 3 shillings, which is almost £20,000. In total, Bath collected and packed up 230 cases of goods and garments, and in terms of cash, over £5,700 was raised, which is the equivalent now to over £300,000. So that was in a few weeks, in bomb-damaged Bath, still rationing. That's how much helping the city of Alkmaar mattered. And a symbol of this campaign was this funny little barrel organ. Already an anachronism by 1945. These had gone out of fashion, but the Rotary Club never knowingly ignored the chance to do something silly. So they bought this old barrel organ, painted it up, and you can see there it says, "We want to raise £1,000, help the Dutch children." And this barrel organ was indeed taken everywhere. It was wheeled around the pitch at Bath City Football Club. It went to this cycle race, this is Victoria Park. And I thought, as a little intermission in my talk, you might like to hear what this extraordinary instrument sounded like. So be prepared. I think that's enough of that. But the barrel organ, it did become a symbol, partially because every time you move a barrel organ like this, it goes out of tune. So after a few weeks, it was horrendous. But it sort of symbolized the appeal. Now, what was happening in Alkmaar? Well, this is the other part of the story. We introduce the burgomaster of Alkmaar, Burgomaster van Kinschot. He had been, of course, deposed and went into hiding. This is him arriving back in Alkmaar, helpfully with, in English, town hall for the Canadian troops, so they knew where they were going. And you can probably see from the faces there, absolute jubilation. And he heard, because the people running the appeal said, well, we'll have an Alkmaar week, and we should have a grand ball at the end of it, and we'll raise even more money. And then someone said, why don't we invite the mayor from Alkmaar? That would be tremendous. Well, what a good idea. Now, you remember that our goods arrived. The goods arrived in crates. All of the crates had a dove of peace stenciled on them and simply said, to Alkmaar from Bath. There was no connection between Bath and Alkmaar before that. And I imagine the slightly bemused citizens of Alkmaar receiving these crates of goods, but obviously were very touched. So a letter was sent to the burgomaster saying, please come and join us for this grand end of the Alkmaar week, all in the pump room. No reply came. So then Jimmy said, well, I'll try and send a telegram. Now, he did try and send a telegram. The telegram operator said, you do realize we've just had a war. You can't just send telegrams. So Jimmy, again, being someone who doesn't like to say no, sweet talk to the operator, managed to get a telegram sent. And Van Kinschot thought, well, this is fantastic. I must go over and say thank you. So he spoke to the Canadian authorities and said, look, is there any way you can arrange for me to have the passes and put me on a plane and get me over? Well, and the major said, well, the Canadian major said, well, it's a bit of a long shot, but we'll see what we can do. And we know from this report, this is from a contemporary paper, Even naar Bath voor de Alkmaar Week, apologies, basically means, in essence, popping over to Bath for Alkmaar Week. And it tells the story of how Van Kinschot managed to get to Bath. And it was a pretty close run thing. So a Lieutenant Adler was clearly past the poison pill of trying to get, and he worked very hard and he made some progress, but he was hitting a brick wall. he thought, I need somebody with a bit of oomph. So he contacted one of the local generals, Canadian Army general, called General Sam Clark. Now, Sam Clark was in the Signals Corps. In other words, lots of communication, lots of contacts, and he'd been working in London. And Van Kinshot told him about the telegram, told him what Bath had been doing, said, I feel I need to go. And Sam Clark, the general, and here he is, said, this is fantastic, you must go. You must go, and I'll help you. So he got the various permissions. Van Kinshot said, well, I haven't got any money. Sam Clark said, don't worry, I'll give you some English money. He came over with £1 in English money, Van Kinshot, and he got a special permission to fly over in an Army Dakota plane. Literally, virtually jumped on a plane at 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, in Bath, Jimmy knew nothing at all about this. All he knew was that the telegrams had gone off, he didn't know. And he tells the story how, and this is almost hard to believe as we sit here, it was pouring with rain in July. And he says he sat at the station in his car, trying not to look suspicious, because he was sitting there all day, looking, as he puts it, for someone who might look Dutch coming out of the station. Anyway, no one appeared. So he went back to what they were calling an austerity supper, which was being held at the Old Red House, which is in New Bond Street. It's where White House now is, the White Stuff shop on the first floor. So a special dinner was being put on there. The guests, to say well done for the Alkmaar appeal. Various distinguished representatives were there from the Netherlands government, the Information Bureau, local military officers. Someone who caused quite a stir apparently was someone called Miss Sabine Zur, who had been a leading member of the resistance, and also someone representing Queen Wilhelmina, Major General Van Oorschot. So this was a very senior gathering. And Jimmy tells the story that as they sat down, the soup was being served, and the young waitress tapped him on the shoulder and said, Mr. Wills, there's someone downstairs wants to see you. And Jimmy thought, oh, well, obviously someone wants to buy a ticket for the ball. Okay, so he popped downstairs. And he says he got there, and there standing in front of him was a very tall, broad-shouldered man in evening dress who said, Mr. Wills? Jimmy said, yes. Van Kinshot from Alkmaar. Jimmy, of course, couldn't believe his eyes. So he took him up the stairs, said, wait here, walked into the room, said, attention, everybody, may I just introduce the mayor of Alkmaar? And there was a stunned silence as Van Kinshot walked in, followed by rapturous cheering, as you can imagine. So Van Kinshot has the first meal he's had since 5 a.m. He has some soup and some of the meal, and then he's taken over to the pump room, where everything is ready for the ball. And there is Jimmy Wills and the Burgomaster with a broad grin on his face. Remember, about 12 weeks earlier, he'd been in hiding from the Nazis. And here he is, in Bath, of all places, in the pump room, in front of some funny old barrel organ, painted up in Dutch colours, asking to raise money for his city. And he goes into the grand ball. He's presented with a cheque for £3,000. As you can imagine, he can't really believe it. He's very moved by the whole thing. And so he then stays, Van Kinshot then stays for a couple of days in Bath. And he obviously tours around. He sees all that bomb damage that I was talking about. He's taken to the grave of those who were killed in the Bath Blitz. He's asked to judge the poster competition for the appeal, and is very touched by some of the posters that have been drawn by children. And everywhere, it says, everywhere around the city, he saw the name Alkmaar. And he judged that the phrase Alkmaar, our sister city, was a sort of watchword in Bath. And rather charmingly, as I said, we have a lot of fun in twinning. And they obviously weren't above having a bit of fun even then, because rather charmingly, he was taken to meet the editor of the Bath Chronicle, who had been writing about this story. And there he was presented with a copy of the of H.M. Bateman's humorous drawing entitled "The Man Who Asked for a Double Scotch in the Grand Pump Room in Bath." And there it is, with suitably outraged Bathonians. And that is the actual picture. Down at the bottom right-hand side, you can see Bateman's signature. And on the other side, it says, "Presented to the Burgomaster of Alkmaar by the editor of the Bath Chronicle and Herald." So Van Kinchot went back to Alkmaar and obviously shared what had happened and what he'd seen. And he made the mayor, the chair of the Rotary Club, the chair of the appeal, and Jimmy Wills freeman of the city of Alkmaar. As we understand it, the only foreigners who have ever been made freemen of the city of Alkmaar. And he invited the three of them to come back to Alkmaar in August to celebrate Queen Wilhelmina's birthday, King's Day, or Queen's Day as it would have been. And there was a parade, and the three from Bath stood there as all sorts of people walked past, including several thousand children. They looked at the children. There were children in rags, children wearing clothes that they borrowed. Some children had no shoes. And Jimmy says it was then that we really realized how important our effort had been. And they put into action a plan. The plan was that 50 children from Alkmaar who had been most badly affected by the hunger winter would be brought over, paid for by the Alkmaar appeal, brought over to England, made healthy again, and then brought to Bath for a Christmas holiday and basically looked after in people's homes. And the appeal went out for families who might look after these children, 50 children, 150 families applied and offered space. These children were flown over in October. They first of all went to a special camp in Ashdown Forest in East Sussex, not far from Tunbridge, Wales, where they received specialist care. They were allowed to rest and play and eat. Jimmy and Ailey visited them to check on their progress and to check that they were learning a bit of English. And from all the reports, they had a wonderful time. And then they were brought on the train to Bath. And on December the 10th, here they are, arriving at Bath Spa Station, as you can tell, full of excitement. And I look at that photo and compare it with those photos I showed you of the hunger winter. They've all got their luggage labels on with their names. I find these photos really quite moving. And it's reported, Gretchen and Tina from Alkmaar said, "This is going to be the best Christmas for years." Something of an understatement, I would have said. And they came and had a wonderful time. They had parties in the pump room, they went on trips. They had a fantastic time. And they went back then to Alkmaar. Now, of course, Van Kinchot had shared his impressions of what happened in Bath. Already in the autumn, he'd sent over 5,000 tulip bulbs to plant in the Orange Grove and help the city recover from bombing. But the people of Alkmaar, of course, were very moved. So they said, well, what can we do? We would like to invite 100 children from Bath to come and have a summer holiday in Alkmaar in 1946. And there are the 100 children assembled in front of the pavilion. If you know the wreck, you can see right at the back, that's still there, that's the cricket pavilion, still there. Of course, no leisure centre there, but there they are, assembled in front of the pavilion. And they travelled over by coach and train to Harwich, then overnight on the 23rd of August, arriving by train into Alkmaar, 4:20 on the 24th, to be met by cheering crowds. These are children who've experienced 6 years of war and bombing of Bath. And while they were there, they also had a wonderful time. We've actually seen the programme, parties and dances, and they went to the beach. And they were spoilt rotten. In fact, one of the children, now an elderly lady, said it was wonderful. They went into sweet shops and they would say, just choose what you like. So they had a wonderful time. And that was the beginning of exchanges. The idea that people would go back and forth, that they would stay with families, They would effectively be there as guests and friends. And you can still, yes, here we are. There's 3 of the Bath children arriving back, I think. They seem to have had a good time. So you can still find physical evidence of our link. This is the Bath Bridge in Alkmaar. If you know Alkmaar, the great cheese market in the middle of Alkmaar, this bridge just crosses one of the canals, and it's got the Bath Bridge. It's called the Bath Bridge. It's got the Bath shield on it. This is the Alkmaar Garden in Orange Grove. It's that circular green area by the Guildhall. It was made the Alkmaar Garden in 1950. And that's the sign. And if you look carefully, you can see at the bottom of that top plaque the expression, Nederland zal herrijzen. Netherlands will rise again. Bath was presented with a large brass gong to call the council to order. And that gong, you could go and visit it. It's in our Guildhall. You go up the stairs, pop your head around the corner towards the council chamber. You'll see it. And we 3 or 4 years ago, we reinstated a tradition where on the 1st of August, which was the anniversary of being given the gong, we, as we very carefully and euphemistically call it, we bong the gong and celebrate freedom and celebrate friendship. And the old barrel organ is still there. If you go into Alkmaar Town Hall, tucked away, just one side, is that old barrel organ, which was presented to Van Kinshot, who delightedly took it. And it's there, a very precious memento. But the great thing about this link is it isn't just a story, it's not just history. This is a living link. We still have people. This year, several hundred people from Bath will go to Alkmaar. We have 2 guests from Alkmaar here. The mayor of Alkmaar was here for 2 days this week. We've had choirs going over. And our rule always is you can't just go there, you have to collaborate. You have to do something jointly. If you're a choir, you have to sing with an Alkmaar choir. If you're going to play hockey, you have to play hockey together. We do things like, bottom left-hand corner, at the Christmas market, we have an Alkmaar stall. We celebrate King's Day. And this is the large crowd, that's Minerva Rowing Club. Minerva Rowing Club have been going back and forth for 40 years. So in short, over 80 years, thousands and thousands of people have gone back and forth between our 2 cities. And as we say, not as tourists, but as guests and friends. We know of at least 5 marriages that have occurred as a result of this. So this is a living, breathing friendship. We knew the outline of that story. The fact that I was able to give you so many details and show you some of those photos and really bring it to life, we're down to 2 people. And I want to say a quick thank you to both of them. First is the gentleman in the hat on this picture. This is Professor Gwydion Prins. He is Ailey Prins's son. And I'm delighted and slightly scared that he's here in the front of the audience this evening. And this was him a few weeks ago, in Alkmaar with a twinning party that went over. And he is standing in front of the door of the Prins family house. And that is the door where Ailey Prins left when he had to escape and saw his mother and father for the last time. That was an occasion those of us who were there will never forget, Professor. And a lot of the papers, and the fact that I was able to quote you Ailey's words was because going through the papers, Professor Prins said, "Oh, I've got some papers. Would this be of any interest to you?" And we looked at it, and there were 6 foolscap pages, and at the top it said, "Speech to Rotary Club, August the 12th, 1940. Couldn't believe it, so it was fantastic. The second person, I'm sorry I haven't got her photo, sorry Aletta, but this is the person who has written a book. Now, I've told you one strand of this tale. There are many, many strands. There are many avenues I could have gone down which I haven't gone down. If you want to know more about it, and it's such a wonderfully rich story, as of course there are many stories from the war like this, but this is Bath's story, it's Alkmaar's story, it's our story that we share. We had two ambitions when I joined the Twinning. One was to see if we could record the barrel organ. I'm not sure, I don't think I regret that, but we have recorded the barrel organ. The second was to actually get the story written down. And we're very lucky that a letter came, and who is a published author, translator, is Dutch, born in Holland, brought up in Holland. I'm looking at it for confirmation, yes. And a letter did a most fantastic job, supported by material from Professor Prins, but her own research. A letter was able to go to Alkmaar and look in the records there, look in our record office, look at Dutch records. And she found out some extraordinary things, and I highly recommend the book, The Remarkable Journey of Mr. Prins. And so good was the book that our colleagues in Alkmaar said, well, we need a Dutch edition. So we now have a Dutch edition, Ontsnapping naar Bath, which means escape to Bath. I think that's right, yeah. And copies are available at the back of the hall, he said, if you want any. But it's a wonderful story. I talked about the research. I'm finishing on this. The research that Aletta did. I talked about the boat that Ellie escaped on. The boat was called the Jonge Jochem, Young Jochem. We found that out pretty quickly. But through Aletta's research, I can tell you that that boat on the slide, that is the Jonge Jochem. And the young, rather jauntily dressed man in the top corner, let's get his name right, that is Bertus van Loosen. And he was the captain who sailed the Jonge Jochem across the North Sea. It's incredible to be able to see these pictures. But there's a little coda to that tale, courtesy of Professor Prins. A few years ago, he was telling me he was chairing a conference at Cambridge University. And he noticed that one of the speakers, who was a professor of architecture from Harvard, had a Dutch surname. And they exchanged pleasantries and chatted and said, oh, how interesting, you know, are you from a long-standing American family? No, I came here during the war. Oh, right, and did you come here direct on a cruise liner? No, I escaped. I got on a little boat. Really, said Miss Prince, what was the name of the boat? Oh, well, you won't know, it was called the Jonge Jochem. And then he said, hang on, Professor Prins, are you Ellie Prince's son? Yes, he said. Ah, said this professor of architecture at Harvard, I was the little boy who sat at the front of the boat and watched for the mines. Sometimes stories are so extraordinary that they have to be true. So that's the story of how we come to be linked. It's an incredible story. I love telling it. And it's a great pleasure to share it with you and to share it with friends from the Netherlands. We've been going for 80 years, and we hope to be going for at least another 80. So thank you very much.